Hello, I'm Chris Barrie, sometime actor and presenter, and welcome to my top 5 tanks. Now, down the decades, there have been so many fantastic tanks that whittling it down to just 5 has been incredibly difficult. I considered a whole range of machines. For example, the Mark V, the first tank which one man could drive by himself, and also the first tank to have a dedicated tank engine designed by Harry Ricardo. Then what about possibly the best German tank of World War II, the Panther, with its virtually impenetrable frontal armour? Or the original thinking of the Swedish S-tank, loaded with intriguing features? Eventually, though, I did get it down to just 5. When I was about 10 years old, I saw a feature film called Kelly's Heroes, a sort of World War II comedy featuring 1960s hippies. And one of the stars of the film was Donald Sutherland, who played a laid-back hippie tank commander called Oddball, who came out with lines like, "Oh man, don't hit me with those negative waves so early in the morning." Quite strange looking back now, but to a bunch of 10-year-olds in 1970, extremely watchable. And the tank that Oddball commanded was none other than the M4 Sherman. And you know, in the bigger picture, the Sherman was a very important tank, because without it, the Allies wouldn't have won the war. With its original 75mm gun, it would often take up to 5 Shermans to overcome a single Panther or Tiger, so it's a good job that Shermans were plentiful. Ease of production was in fact one of the many virtues of this tank, and it went on to become one of the most prolific tanks ever made. Later in the war, it was upgunned with this British 17-pounder weapon, which at least gave it a fighting chance against the Tigers and the Panthers. The Sherman was one of the most reliable and versatile tanks of all time. Ease of maintenance and component replacement made it very user-friendly for the crews, and like many of the greatest tanks, it provided the perfect platform for a variety of other roles. A Sherman can give you a very nice edge, which is why it's at number 5 in my top 5. Simply standing next to the museum's Tiger I, I could really sense the chilling potency of this Leviathan of the tank world. Everything is massive, heavy and well made. And for the Allied crews in their Shermans and Churchills, seeing one of these on the horizon, well, it must have put the fear of God into them. There are probably better all-rounders in the tank world, but for sheer battlefield presence, the German Tiger I is hard to beat. This is 56 tons of thick 110mm armour, a magnificent 694 horsepower Maybach petrol engine, all crowned by this awesome 88mm weapon, which the Allies often struggled to deal with. Because in the right position and in the right hands, even a single Tiger I could be practically invincible, as the British 7th Armoured Division found out in June 1944. Lieutenant Wittmann of the 501st SS Heavy Tank Battalion picked off the lead vehicle and the tail vehicle, and then helped himself to the other 25 in the middle. Then, joined by his colleagues, he demolished an entire squadron of Cromwells. Tiger I was a formidable weapon, which often caused the Allies to stop and re-evaluate. It's at number 4 in my top 5. At around 8 tons, the Alvis Scorpion is the only light tank in my top 5, and my own experience with this vehicle has certainly contributed to its inclusion. As a teenager, I vividly recall my father, ex-Royal Army Ordnance Corps, sitting in the turret of one of these as it whizzed around the test track at Central Vehicle Depot Ludgershall at probably about top speed, round about 50 miles an hour, while I grappled with the controls of a 432 personnel carrier. I've also spent some memorable filming days with the Scorpion, both on the turret and in the driving seat, both on-road and off-road. And an exhilarating experience is exactly what it is. However, that aside, this is one magnificent tank. It was the first all-aluminium armoured tank with an excellent power-to-weight ratio. It had a low track-to-ground pressure which enabled it to traverse very soft ground. Now, the Scorpion was built on a multi-purpose chassis and was the first of a family of vehicles, including Scimitar, its sister tank, turreted with a 30mm Radin cannon. There was Spartan, an armoured personnel carrier, Samaritan, an armoured ambulance, to name but a few, some of which are still in service with the British Army today. Scorpion's excellent performance was originally provided by the legendary twin overhead camshaft Jaguar J60 petrol engine, the same motor more or less which powered the great post-war Jaguar sports and saloon cars, which just so happened to be some of my favourite cars. So all in all, the Scorpion is my kind of tank, which is why it's mixing it with the heavyweights at number 3. Pop pickers. A lot of experts say the T-34 was probably the greatest tank ever built. Wide-track Christie suspension, superb sloping armour, a lightweight diesel engine of 38 litres if you please, and originally a decent 76mm gun were the main elements of this machine. In 1941, it was vastly superior to all of its German counterparts in range, protection and cross-country performance. I've spent an afternoon filming with the museum's T-34, and I vividly recall it emerging from the gloom of the shed, looking sinister, sounding like a locomotive, its rumbling 38-litre diesel engine propelling it forward in a haze of blue smoke, giving off an aura of total mean aggression, a real animal, and frankly, something of a brute to drive. But then, I would have been disappointed had it not been. Echoing the virtues of the aforementioned Sherman, the T-34 was robust and easy to maintain, and it predated the American tank. Comparing the two, for me, the T-34 has the edge. It's just that little bit more menacing, that little bit more butch, if you like. And in 1943, keeping ahead of the game, the T-34 was upgunned with this 85mm weapon, which really did turn it into a devastating machine which dominated the Eastern Front for the rest of the war. Not only did it influence the design of the excellent German Panther, but it also provided a design model for future Russian tanks right through the 20th century. I think a very worthy number 2. My number 1 tank is a great tank by any standards, and proved once and for all that Britain could produce a tank to match the very best in the world. Although prototypes were made before the end of the Second World War, it wasn't until 1949 that the magnificent Centurion Mark I entered service. It sold all over the world and saw action right across the globe for decades and decades and decades. Key to the Centurion's remarkable longevity was that it lent itself to being up-armoured and up-gunned, gaining in 1959 its magnificent 105mm weapon, replacing this 20-pounder. For me, the Centurion is just perfect, it's just right. And of course it comes out of a time between the 1940s and 60s when Britain produced some magnificent machines right across the board. The Centurion certainly sits at the top table. A real high point in British engineering excellence. And I remember my father and his colleagues in the early 70s, just when the Centurion was being retired and replaced by the Chieftain, they expressed a certain amount of disappointment, particularly in view of the teething troubles they were having with Centurion's successor. The sound basic design of the Centurion enabled it to provide a platform for specialized vehicles such as the Centurion Avery, Armoured Vehicle Royal Engineers, and as a bridge layer, it served the British Army right into the 21st century. Now, this tank was powered by the 27-litre Rolls-Royce Meteor petrol engine, which is essentially a surface equivalent of the famous Merlin aircraft engine, which powers the Spitfire, and 4 of them can be found on a Lancaster bomber. Although the Rolls-Royce Meteor petrol didn't give Centurion the greatest range or speed, it sounds just as good if not better, than a Spitfire. The legendary Centurion simply has to be my number 1 tank. So, those were my top 5 tanks. Please subscribe to the museum's YouTube channel and support the museum on Patreon.